Thank you for staying after with the weather as it is. My name is Rachel DeGuzman. I'm the Director of Engagement here at Geva Theater. And I'm so happy to have this hacker panel contextualize the play you've seen tonight. And really, I have to say, I don't know exactly what Sarah has in mind. Sarah is facilitating, moderating this conversation, Sarah Yarger. We had a conversation last week where the two of us, talked about artificial intelligence. We talked about how she creates fake news for her students. And so there just were many reasons to have her here and the people that she's brought with her. And I want everybody to introduce themselves. I'm actually going to go and sit over there. And this is not a talk back, this is more of a facilitated conversation.
Well, yes, thank you so much for having us again. My name is Sarah Yarger. I am the Project and Operations Manager for the Global Cybersecurity Institute Cyber Range, where we perform all of our trainings and simulated experiences in the world of cyber attack. I also am the co-director of our SAFE Lab, which is the lab that we have on campus that specializes in all of our penetration testing that we do for outside companies and is a tie back to our students and their learning experience. I have asked to be here with us tonight some of my colleagues and partners in business over at RIT. This is Lucas Morris. He is an RIT alum. He also now is an adjunct professor with the Global Cybersecurity Institute and is teaching a class on, is it audit, right? Security audit. So yes, by night, that is his job. During the day, he has another full-time job where he's a cybersecurity professional and he works for a security risk assessment firm called Security Risk Advisor. Yeah, Security Risk Advisor. And next to him is Meredith Kasper. She is a hacker extraordinaire as well, working with Tom Kopchak, who is from, they both are hailing rather, from Cleveland in Ohio. They work for a company of security testing penetration from a company called Hurricane Labs. But their connection back to RIT is interesting in that they also facilitate as directors, along with Lucas, for our Collegiate penetration testing competition that we hold every year that's unique to RIT and run entirely out of our cyber range there. And that is a unique opportunity for students to come in and really test their hacking skills against a completely simulated network setup that is done entirely by volunteers from the base up. So you imagine an entire company, and they're the ones who do exactly what we almost just saw, right? They just make it happen. They can, what did we just recently produce?
Well, we recently produced a hotel that was called the Cozy Croissant. And the goal for the students in this event was to simulate what it would be like to try to get access to a hotel's systems. So you think about when you go to a hotel, what are some of the things that you do? You give them your name, your address, your email address, your phone number. They take your driver's license, they take your credit card. Those are all things that you don't want to have fall in the wrong person's hands. So one of the things we wanted to have the students do the opportunity to do is, what is it like to try to get into hotel systems, and what sorts of things you need to secure in order for the hotel to not have a breach happen. And this is also something I worked with Meredith to do. We actually had the students pretend to call the help or the front desk of the hotel and get information about someone who's either staying at the hotel or someone who is going to be staying at the hotel. You can talk a little bit about that, Meredith.
Yeah, and that was a lot of fun. We taught the students how to do the basics of social engineering, which is essentially getting information from somebody else, whether that be an email address, information about the room for the hotel, or what they would be willing to try to get the front desk to give up. And for the person playing the front desk, who was me, I got to play the very, very, very naive person who was more than happy to help them find their lost grandmother or the child that they forgot, or help them with an audit. The stories that the students created were crazy and wonderful, but I was willing to give up whatever information I could to help them, give them their grandmother's credit card, because she might be staying here, I don't know. and help the students learn how to have a two-way conversation that is tailored at gathering information while still trying to not let the target know that you are socially engineering.
Meanwhile, I was in the background frantically typing, trying to find the information while she's all being nice. But it was fun teamwork. Yeah.
So I will also add to this, right? So professionally, as Sarah mentioned, part of what I do is I'm one of the leads of a cybersecurity consultancy here in Rochester. And part of what we do is this live, and everything that you just saw in the show is part of what we do. Building fake profiles, trying to gather information, just in an attempt to get access to a company. Now, in our case, we are paid by that company to do this against their employees.
Good guys.
Yeah, we are not doing this through industrial espionage or any sort of negative activity or malicious activity. And we do this to help companies figure out where their weak points are so that they're not vulnerable to these things. But as Tom and Meredith mentioned, and as we all saw, all that is real activity. It is stuff that we do, frankly, daily. And some folks on our team today were actually building Facebook profiles to try and solicit information from a target of ours, a company that we've been contracted to work with.
So what was the point like during the show tonight that you felt like, wow, that's just really real close to home? What really struck you? I'd love to hear from each of you.
It took about 5 minutes.
No,
The cubicles. I think in a lot of cases, a lot of the folks that I have worked with, a lot of times it's very corporate, but there are some folks in the industry that come from the PsyOps groups in various government entities, and it's everyone. It's ours, it's all the others, and the truth is that a background in psychology can also help, almost in many cases, help you more than a background in technology. And bridging that gap between the two is very important, because part of what we do is incite emotion. And if you can incite emotion in someone, you can get them to do what it is that you would like them to do. And then a lot of times that is something as simple as, I want you to just click on this link, or put in your password here, or give me this information over the telephone. But all of those techniques and the stuff that they were talking about very early on, it literally was minutes before I started to see the things that we do. Certainly with probably a little less laughing and a little more laughing, depending on the time.
Yeah, for me it was definitely the bouncing up and down in the chair and having to sleep for 72 hours, since that's essentially how I function during my day job. But on top of that, the talking back and forth between the coworkers about how you're going to craft something, tweaking the wording just a little bit. There have been times that my coworkers and I have gone back and forth on an email for 4, 5, 6 hours trying to get the perfect wording that we're going to send to somebody to convince them to click on that link or to send us some additional information via that email.
Being someone that has been involved in that 4 or 5 hour email exchange, working together and developing that sort of thing, yeah. A lot of what we do is building trust and making a human connection. And that is one of the most valuable things that you can exploit, because people do things that computers might not do. And if you can basically build trust and someone sees something as legitimate, they're more likely to fall for what you're doing, see it as something that, oh, this is something that's real. My guard's let down, I'm going to go ahead and just go ahead and do what you want to do as the person who's trying to manipulate the situation.
Absolutely. I think that that's a huge theme of this day, right? Is, what is the truth, and how do we determine that? And how are you helping to, guide clients and, things, as these questions come up, right? You're essentially crafting a truth for them that you want them to buy into, right? How are you in helping to educate people to buy into the correct truth, if you will, or recognize when things are not the truth out in the real world, when you're not the ones there, paid to test them?
So truth is relative, and truth is...
Where's that psychology coming in? Yeah. So ethics?
It's here, right? And ethics is a big part of what we do, but truth is very relative. Before kind of getting into my current role, was the Chief Information Security Officer of a fairly large bank. And so Sarah, to your question and point, how do we prevent people from doing that? How do we educate them? Part of it is doing what I do now. Right? The best way to educate someone is to give them an example. So we will do that.
So your truth is essentially more true.
It depends, right? So I think from a psychological perspective, we all carry our own truth. We're all looking, everyone around us is looking to influence that truth on each of us. And in a lot of cases, most of us don't know what our own truth is. Sometimes we only know what we think it is. And so it's less teaching people the truth and more giving them the tools to recognize when their truth is being influenced. Because we all have our own, and it's all very valid truth. But the problem is that these days we have a lot of people trying to influence that on us. And in some cases that comes down to, a friend trying to get us to go out and grab a beer or to make some sort of chaotic decision. Sometimes it is, as a CISO, right, I'm trying to train my employees on recognizing that, and I'm trying to influence their truth. Sometimes it's an attacker that's trying to get me to make a decision without determining what that truth is, and without letting the natural things that have developed in us as human beings to recognize that truth, and to what we call is cross the uncanny valley, and see without seeing that. So again, truth is very relative. It's teaching people to recognize when it's being influenced, not necessarily altering their truth themselves.
Absolutely. Are there some easy ways, either Meredith or Tom, you could share that are some kind of industry insider tips that you teach people to sort of look for? Like what are some indicators that, like maybe what we're reading in the news, right? Maybe this isn't quite quite a true news story. Maybe it is some fake news that has been cooked up by the local Russian troll farm, right?
Am I not the local Russian troll farm?
Well, I know you just admitted to writing a lot of things, but
Okay.
I mean, now I'm saying like in terms of what Lucas suggested, that you share tools, right, with people for how to really evaluate the truth, from their perspective. What are there some that are easy that you could sort of share with just some, lay tips for how to discern what you're reading?
Yeah. Certainly, I'll kick that off. There are a lot of various websites online that will do fact checking and provide 5 or 6 different sources. When it's something that is politically charged, they will pull things that are from both sides of the aisle historically, so that you know that you're getting the most accurate, up-to-date information. And honestly, if you are looking to fact check some information and it says that it is partially true, and pulling from a variety of different sources to give you that information, that's likely your best source of that information, since the information you started with is partially true, and you have a variety of different sources providing other information, and then you are able to find your own truth from that information. But of course, when you are reading through an article or receiving an email and there's some form of urgency or something that looks extremely jazzy and maybe not so well done, kind of the way that you saw some of those tweets have broken links within the show, it's always good to be cautious and verify every single part of what you're seeing.
One of the things I would say is the most dangerous thing that can happen is for you to think that you're invincible to something like this, or it can't happen to you, or you might not be targeted. That's something that I see a lot of times with people who are professionals in this industry. They think, oh, I'm too good or too smart to click on a link that might take me somewhere else, or I'm not going to fall for something like that. I can think of a really good example of that where, in retrospect, it happened to me. This is a couple of months ago or something like that, I got a notification from the application that we use in our company. It said that Meredith sent something to me, or it didn't send something, she accepted a share request or something online. I'm like, I never shared something with Meredith recently. And not even thinking, I clicked right on that link. It turns out there was something I shared with her like 6 months ago, and it just forgot about it. But in retrospect, that would have been a perfect attack against me. It was something I used, something I didn't expect. It piqued my interest, I clicked on it. And that just made me realize I have to think about that sort of thing, because if that was something that was targeted to me, that could have happened. And that's something where if someone knows the target and their audience, they can be very effective. I'm sure some of you have gotten emails before that say, this is my bank, you need to reset your password, okay, something like that. It's really easy to dismiss if it's not a bank you do business with, because it just doesn't make sense, it's not something you deal with. But if they send it to you with your name on it, a link to your bank, and they say, this is a bank I use, and we need you to do something, it's a lot more real.
Yeah, that seems convincing.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
the bank is telling me like, oh my gosh, something with my account, right?
Yeah.
So- Yes, please.
So, to kind of get a different perspective of the question, right, how is it that I can identify these things? There's a couple of key methods that attackers, malicious actors, and whatever term we want to use for this sort of thing. And some of it's very targeted and very specific. Like as Tom mentioned, that is a very specific attack against him personally. Now I could tell stories of clients where executives are targeted, their social media is targeted, but for the most part, folks like us, and like all of us, we're not getting targeted individually typically. But we are being targeted from a demographic perspective, right? So I think, what was it? It was 55 through 75 in Kissimmee, Wisconsin, like divorcees, right? Those are real metrics, and people spend time to figure those out. And their goal, right, the standard operating procedure here is to generate emotion. Because as human beings, we have evolved to detect when things don't make sense. But that doesn't work when our fight or flight response is running. Now, it may not be the full response, but it tends to be emotion begins to start that process. And our brains have evolved to bypass a lot of that logical process when emotion has been brought into the process. Now, if you look at everything from the marketing of chewing gum and tennis shoes, all the way up through trying to influence elections, every one of those attempts to elicit two things, really. It is repetition and emotion. It takes on average, I think research has said about 12 repetitive statements before our brains start to accept it as not fact, but at least as understanding. That's why ads are so pervasive. You see them everywhere, and you start to hear the same statement over and over again, because eventually it does not necessarily become your truth, but it now starts to influence your truth. So when we look at these long-term campaigns like we saw tonight, that's what we see, and they brought that up. Repetition. The other is emotion. Now, when you look at something like a social engineering attack against trying to get your bank account information, right, that's what they're trying to do. There's a couple that are going around right now that are basically saying, we turned on your webcam, we saw what you did on your computer, and we're going to broadcast it out to everybody. Now, I've gotten that on computers that don't even have webcams. All of that is fake, but the idea here is, well, they don't say what you did. It was just, I saw what you did, right? They're trying to get you to be emotional because they want you very quickly to make a snap decision. So with all of this, whether it's reading the news, browsing through Facebook, or checking your email, the important thing is if something seems even slightly off, if you feel like you're being driven towards some sort of emotional response, no matter what it is, stop. I generally tell people, if you have to, get up, go to the bathroom, go get some water, get a cup of coffee, come back, read it again. Because just a 30-second break will start to give your brain time to catch up. It will start to give you that opportunity to say and to think critically, this doesn't make sense. Or maybe it does. From there, you can then start to make logical decisions on how to respond. I'm sorry.
I can think of a great example of that emotion where you might see Facebook Messenger, a family member will message you and say, check out who died, and there's a link there. I've gotten that before, and the intent of that is to take over your account. But you see that, someone messages, it's something that's highly emotional, and your brain is just like, I want to click on this link. And they almost dare you to not. And that's something that's very powerful as something, you're exploiting humanity and how people think.
I assume, there's probably a lot of emotion that was felt by the audience. I know I was there feeling like, oh my gosh, there's some things I wish I did not connect to in this right now. Or some things I'm like, oh my gosh, what would I do in this situation? Were there any things like that popped out to you? I'll just open this up a little bit. Like, anybody want to ask a question about, just perhaps like maybe like a term or something that may have come up during the show for you that was, you know, perplexing, you might want some clarification on. I know there were some like, you know, some tech terminology got thrown around some, you know, places there, especially when, you know, emotions started to rise in certain aspects of the show. So I just want to give this opportunity. Well, there's a section that somebody was just, you know, what the heck was happening with this thing? Was that a real thing that happens in the world, or?
Could I ask what the
Absolutely.
purpose of the narrative, what was the purpose of the narrative, which looked like a gaming thing, when stuff was going on and on?
Very good, yeah, that's a great question. And again, I just want to preface this by saying we are not representative from the cast, nor the, you know, the producer of this wonderful play, but we can speak to the technical elements and clarify, you know, anything that was, you know, oh yes, this is like a common tool or software tool or something like that. So let's try and. All right.
So, I'm not sure.
Right, okay, yeah, so exactly.
So I think I have some thoughts on that, but I think specifically, at least from my perspective, I think it certainly drove a lot of humor and kind of connection with the, you know, a lot of the technology industry has a very underlying nerd culture. And there were a lot of tropes and memes, like things that are basically part of, you know, the society politic. Not talking politics in general, but just kind of societal understanding. Especially in the nerd culture, there were a lot of things that hit on very quickly. I do think from a story perspective, it was kind of trying to drive the character forward a little bit. But I think from our perspective, it also did connect in with just a lot of the things that we see, whether it's ourselves, our peers, or others that are into. Personally, I kind of read it more as a kind of a deep part of character development and less a very specific piece that they were trying to drive from the technical culture. But okay.
Yes, yeah, from a technical perspective, yeah, it's sort of like, you know, we couldn't really say necessarily why, you know, that was necessarily an element, but definitely can connect on a personal level, right, as a bunch of nerds here who all, like, probably found that humorous to some extent.
It was very funny.
For us, yes. Yes.
You get my workout somehow.
Excellent.
You are not currently watching the workout mode for this.
Oh, it is already.
Oh.
Thank you for opening this up and for being here. This play took place in 2016.
Yes.
Obviously, technology and social media has changed. It changes by the minute. So what do you think is different, the newer threats, the newer insidious viruses that are coming through in our social media particularly, that are being architected or manipulated differently today than there were 7 or 8 years ago?
And we're going to limit you to, like, 2 minutes.
Sorry.
You're going to have to, like, really, no, the three of you, like, this is something, it's an excellent question, right? I mean, you've got the right panelists here who can speak to this, in great length, but to summarize, maybe some key.
So the laptops would have better Wi-Fi. I think there's a lot of similarities. Like, social media, it's evolved, but the fundamental concept of humans interacting with other humans is still there. I think there's more controls that are in place on some of the platforms, at least, to make fake accounts a little bit harder to create. I know we've seen that through some of the competition stuff we've done before, where it's actually really difficult at this point to make a fake Facebook account, and a lot of that gets shut down, despite our best efforts. So I think that's a kind of a side effect of this happening. There's more controls that are put in place, but like anything, those controls aren't perfect. And just like that, one platform might be harder to create an account or persona on. Other platforms are a lot easier. To the point where some of them really don't have any controls for that. So I think what you might see is maybe like Facebook was a big target in 2016 for 2024, they might be focusing on something else. Maybe it's Twitter, maybe it's Instagram, maybe it's something else. We don't know yet. But there's a lot of pivoting that has to happen into what you're actually able to pull things off.
Yeah, and similarly to that, as Tom was talking about, the places where it is more restrictive to create those automated accounts or fake accounts, we've also seen some of those places grow more lax to try and push to drive more content. They don't care whether or not it is real or fake. They care about the fact that there is content being generated. That means that it looks like there is traffic going to that platform. So things like Twitter, who used to have multiple ways to sign in and get your account verified, now you can just pay for that. And you don't actually have to verify that you are a real person. You can pay the wonderful $8, I believe it is, for a blue check mark to look more like a real person and to be featured more within the tweet stream. And you can use something like TikTok to push out content and not verify that you are a person linked to a phone number and an account.
And how many examples of that did we see with the Twitter verification?
Yes.
Yeah.
I believe there are some people still masquerading as Elon Musk, even though he created a new rule to ban that. But they have the blue check mark.
The hackers will prevail.
I think we saw a really good example of the change actually in the story tonight. So in 2016, a lot of what was generated was fake accounts. It was volume. But over the last 8 to 10 years, maybe 15 years, a lot of the social media systems have really tried to figure out how to drive more engagement. Right? More eyeballs on screens gives them more revenue. So they are incentivized to keep us looking at those things. And they've used algorithms to figure out how to get things in front of us that are exciting for us, that generate and elicit that emotion. So there was an example in the narrative tonight about the hashtag tunnel kids, where instead of just looking at volume and creating posts, they created a story that got us to amplify and echo that for themselves. So I think that's what we see more of now. It's much harder to create these accounts. So instead, more time is spent to craft a story and a narrative that then gets other people, normal people, to amplify that story and to amplify that narrative. And by doing so, they've essentially figured out how to hack these algorithms to use them for themselves, to make their own posts and their own content become popular.
No, that's excellent. Great reference back to the show as well. Yes. I can repeat for you too.
What's that?
I'll repeat for you for the
Oh,
video.
okay. So I hope you didn't discuss this. I came a little late. But I got that email that you were talking about earlier. I saw you this, I saw you that, and it was horrible.
Yeah.
But in regards to what you said a couple minutes ago, they sent you a message about your colleague that you knew, and it just seemed harmless at the time. I've always wondered, do you have to actually have some kind of dialogue with them, or is it so sensitive these days where if you just hit reply, they got you? You know what I'm saying? How deep do you have to get involved? Does that really make sense?
That's a great question. I think the question, I just want to repeat it just for filming's sake, is just, when you get, an email like we had talked about, it's a fake email, it's really directed at I saw what you did, through your webcam, and the question is how real does that connection really have to be for it to motivate you to take that next step, whatever action?
Yeah.
Basically, I think what you said was, can you get sucked in by just hitting reply?
That's more
Exactly, yes, sorry. Thank you for the clarification. Yes, can you get sucked in by just hitting reply? Do you even have to be that intrigued yourself to even click on it, right? It's an excellent.
So there's a couple of different approaches that happen for that. One of the big things that someone, if they're trying to take over your account or get your machine compromised or otherwise hacked, so to speak, they'll often want you to open an email and click on a link and something. And simply that action of clicking on a link a lot of times can cause something else to happen. So whether it's software getting installed on your machine that then can be used by someone else on the internet to remotely control it, that could be something that could be an objective. There's also things that are called ransomware, and that's malicious software that's designed to basically encrypt your system or make it so that like photos and documents are unreadable and inaccessible to you unless you pay someone else to get that. So a goal for that on the attacker side, they don't know who they're targeting. They're just blasting a whole bunch of emails out, hoping that some small subset of people click, subset of people click on that, and they get to the point where you send payment to them. It's a business in other countries where there are people who go to work, and their job is to steal money from other people. So a lot of times, just by clicking on something, that can launch an attack on your machine. Something else you might see is maybe there's an attachment. You might get something that says, there's this invoice, or there's this tracking number, or something like that. And from what you're seeing, it might look like it's just a document, like a PDF file or something like that, a Word document. But under the hood, it's actually something that isn't really that. There might be some other component to that that installs a malicious software program on there. And from your perspective, it might look like the document just loads fine, and you don't even know that anything bad happened. But behind the scenes, your computer is now talking to someone else, and then they have control over that. Now, the one about someone else that saw your activity, if that's just something they're blasting out to everyone. They don't have access to your machine. Right. But the idea is they want to basically a lot of the things in those emails is we want you to reply back to this and send us money. So there's nothing they have. They're just trying to get money out of it. Right. And really, at the end of the day, a lot of it is financially driven. It's a financial crime. They're in another country. There's no way for America law enforcement to track them down easily, and it's often not going to be worth the effort even. But financial money is the primary driver for that, and it is a business in a lot of countries where there aren't laws that we have the same in the U.S. That said, like if someone tried to do that from the United States, that's a federal crime. So that's something that would happen here. But obviously, if someone in Russia is doing that, or someone in Ukraine or another country that doesn't have the same control with the United States, that becomes an issue. I don't know if either of you want to add anything to that.
Do you have to click on a link to be compromised, or can you just, if you open the email and don't click on a link, can they compromise you? And if you reply but don't click on a link, can you be compromised?
Okay. Quite simply opening the email, the vast majority of the time will not cause any issues. I do not personally know of a single time that has happened. From a technical perspective, and I don't want to get into the nuances of it.
leave his business card here.
Yeah. From a technical perspective, is there a way it possibly could? Sure. But it's not going to. And it doesn't, right? It would require your web browser or Outlook or whatever to be out of date and all these other things to happen. Realistically, it doesn't happen that way. It's so challenging, people don't try because, as Tom mentioned, it's a business. So they're trying to get you to click on something, to load something, to open something. Generally, simply reading it is not going to do anything, and simply replying is probably also not going to do anything except letting them know you got the email. So I probably would not be replying.
I will add one thing though. By opening that email, they often will know that that email was opened and a rough idea of where you're located and some details about that. Because emails have images in them. And that image is often somewhere else on the internet. So you click on that email, your computer is going to go, I'm reaching out to this image, and there's often some information in that path or that location, that image that identifies that email to you. So they're going to have a record somewhere that says this image was accessed, we know that email was opened. So there is at least some information to know an email has been read, or not even read, but at least something, not even necessarily a person, because sometimes emails get accessed by machines and things like that. But there's some indicator in the back-end system that says, yes, something interacted with us. But that's typically not going to necessarily result in like your machine getting compromised.
So I'm fascinated just sitting here listening to you talk about, this is, I know these things, and this is actually what's going on, and it's like, at some point, each one of you made the choice to be on the good team, right? Why was that? How did you come to that?
You don't want to go to jail?
But, you know.
I wouldn't say I'm on the good team fully.
Ooh, we're getting to admissions of guilt here tonight. Well, tell us what that means.
There are a lot of ways in which it is very important to help people learn, and sometimes they have to learn the hard way. And that is to say nothing illegal has ever been done, but there are times where you will have to teach somebody the hard way that clicking on that attachment, and it always comes from a point of education and helping that person further down the road, because it will be somebody with truly malicious intentions who is going to try and get that banking information, your credit card number, or any information that they can get, your passwords to, your bank account or your retirement. And of course, as both Tom and Lucas have said, it is usually mostly financially driven. So I spend a lot of time trying to educate people on why you wouldn't give up that information and why you should always be cautious when clicking on links in emails or responding to some sort of urgent message that you have received.
I'm pleading with it.
Excellent. I want to be conscious of our time, but I also want to ask our wonderful host if you have any questions that you would like to direct towards the panel while we're here, or over to the audience.
I just have one question to ask, and then we will have to end.
Yes.
So that everybody can go home. But I love that whole connection between you're doing something on the good team. But the reason I named it the hacker panel is because I would think in order to be preventative, you also have to be hackers. And I think, Meredith, you were talking a little bit about what you were doing just now, about how you have to do that. Can you talk a little bit about people's, when you even talk about hacking, I mean, I knew it was a provocative term when I named it, but the whole idea of hacking and maybe a couple of the misconceptions people have about what that is.
Yeah, where do you guys get called in the streets?
Okay, so hacker is a very provocative term. The other provocative term that we use professionally, this is actually called, what we do is called penetration testing, which is attempting to break into an organization. So in a lot of cases, we're good, but we're drawn bad. We have to use the same tools, the same techniques, the same procedures, the same processes that all of the bad folks do. So to your prior question, I got into this, frankly, because it's a lot of fun, and it's a lot more fun doing it when you're not worried about getting arrested. But we do these same things. So it is our job to break into companies. That is day in and day out what all of our teams at my company do, in addition to monitoring and defending and all sorts of other stuff. So as far as the fun stuff, I mean, I've gotten to travel all around the world, and I've done everything from light a piece of paper on fire and throw it through a door so that an infrared sensor will trip and let me through the door at 2 a.m. Yeah, I know, I was young. I've made phone calls to folks and gathered information to, I've walked into a bank branch and walked out with a server and convinced the branch manager that I needed to be the one to take it. So yeah, I'm proud of that one. And so there's a lot of stories and other things that I could sit here and all three of us could all night and tell, and a lot of them are a lot of fun. But we do the same things the same way that everyone else does. The main difference is, in our case, we're limited in time. We may have a week or two, versus the attackers have months and months and months to get into places.
And that's because you've only been hired for a week or two.
That's correct.
Just clarifying.
That's because we've been hired for a couple of weeks. So I don't know if I'm getting at your question.
Absolutely.
Okay. But there's, it's an incredible amount of fun, but it's also very monotonous because so as an example, this week we are doing some work for a very large company. They have about 35,000 employees. And right now we have managed to social engineer 10 employees. We have their workstations. Now we're trying to get administrators to log into those workstations so that we can take over everything. So how do I do that and not get caught? Well, that's a very monotonous planning. And frankly, our job is, we found the needle in this haystack. Now we're going to go to a stack of needles and try and find the one that's 3 inches longer. And then from there, I'm going to another stack, and another stack, and another stack. And so we use a lot of automation, and tooling, and scripting, and other things. And frankly, it's the same tools that other people use. At our conferences, you never know, is someone a good person or a bad person? You don't ask the question. Because we all use the same tools, and we all want to know what the other's doing. So we frankly communicate so that folks like us can know what folks like them are doing.
I guess one thing I would say around the lines of that, in addition, I know Lucas, you're an adjunct professor. I am also at a university in Cleveland, Baldwin, and one of the things that I try to teach the students is the things that you do on a computer, especially if you're doing a security assessment, have real world impact. And that was one of the things just before the students left for spring break a week ago. I wanted them to focus. When you are doing something, there are people whose lives can be impacted based on what you do. A great example, one of the companies that I've worked with in the past, they were a hospital. Hospitals obviously have a very important responsibility to keep people from dying. If the computers at the hospital stop working because of something you do, and they have to send the ambulances away from the hospital to somewhere else because of something that you did incorrectly, that is a huge issue. That is something that has happened. I'm sure you've seen this. I've seen this happen. There are ways you can run an attack, for example, that can lock out every single user account if you do it wrong. You do that, hospital shuts down, people's lives can be at stake. So one of the things we have to consider as professionals is how do we know what we're doing, how do we use the tools responsibly so that that doesn't happen? And also, how do we help a customer identify those sorts of issues so that they don't have something like that happen? If it isn't someone who's a good guy, who has the permission and has a contract with the customer, how do you make sure that doesn't happen in the real world?
That's no small responsibility. I think one of the things I'd like to say there too is that that's what I'm really proud to work at RIT and manage at the cyber range, because I get to see the quiet side of things where we actually give the kids opportunity, right, at the CPTC challenge, and other penetration testing challenges, where they get to do that, right? They have a hospital network there. They found this vulnerability. Now they're going to try and exploit it, and no one is going to die. But really, it's a great experience, and RIT has really done a great job in the way they've set up and really brought students in to have that experience when they graduate. So.
Sarah, can you just tell them that they can come to the building? Because I actually was in
Sure.
the simulation room. I got that privilege. It is the coolest thing in the world. I mean, it really
We
is.
do. We have a pretty brand new space over there. It's our new Global Cybersecurity Institute, but the cyber range itself is a top, state-of-the-art training facility room. It's set up to be like a security operations desk center where you could be sitting there and we can actually spin up technically up to 5,000 virtual machines at once and be monitoring them. But what we use it for really is for trainings where we bring in people and we simulate a company. And you can simulate different departments in a company and then actually have different attacks take place while you're in the simulation. So you're there, you're actually seeing things, it's happening to you live, like you're at your computer station, you're faced with decisions you have to make. We can literally control the temperature in the room to match what you're feeling. So it's a great space. It has a lot of fun features. It's always a big highlight on tours. So definitely, if you're in for a tour, stop by. Usually somebody's around to, open it up and give you a quick demo if it's a quiet day. Or come to something organized like one of our, the open RIT days.
Imagine RIT here in a couple weeks.
That's right. Imagine RIT will be coming up in a couple weeks. Excellent. Yeah, good time.
So
I think Lucas, relax with you.
okay. Do you want the question?
Or did you? No.
Okay. No, I was just going to share a story of ethics, which I think is a big part of the industry that we work in. So if
30-second story?
yeah, I'll do it 30 seconds. So we all do research, we release tools, and everyone in the industry does. And about 10, 11 years ago, I released one that was actually fairly widely used. And what was very interesting was having a conversation. In this case, it was something that was used against Microsoft. And I had several executives at Microsoft reaching out to me to start to ask questions of, okay, this is being used in real world attacks. We need to figure out how to defend against it. And we need your help to figure out exactly what you did. Now, in my case, this was not a vulnerability or an issue. It was merely a way to identify things. It was not a malicious action at all. But a simple tool like that suddenly got integrated into lots of other things. And we worked together collaboratively to figure out how to identify when people were doing this. So from my perspective, right, was it ethical for me to even release it? And the question that we get asked in the industry a lot is, well, if I didn't do it, would someone else have? I can't answer that. But what I can say is, from my perspective, right, I did everything I could to help them take the next step. But then 6 months later, someone figured out how to bypass the things that we did. And it's for the last 10 years, that one specific issue has gone back and forth and back and forth. And so all of this is constantly changing, ever evolving. And that's where kind of looking at what your ethics are and how you deal with that is a core part of our industry.
Absolutely. I think we definitely, thanks for really hitting on the head with the whole community side of it too, because really cybersecurity is up to the community. And it's, you know, you have to know kind of how each community thinks, but it's the community as a whole that really certifies and, you know, says this is something that we're going to support and say, yeah, you know, this is secure or it's not. So thank you for being a part of that on the trusted side.
And Meredith, did you have another thing? Oh, you were just scanning the microphone.
I was trying to get her to give the last word, because she's got a lot of good things to say.
Well, we could have, I mean, you know, we could have a hacker picnic. We could have hacker dinners. I mean, there's, you know, fun stories to be told from all across the lens, right? So.
I just realized, I was about to say, we did all say our fun handles and things. I realized I'm the one that's fun.
Okay, sure, that would be fun.
Nope, we're good.
Oh,
I like your handle. Is it Mistress?
You used to leave one.
Thank you for joining us this evening.
And I think this is just, you know, it really has given me some insight into aspects of the play I've seen, I think, 4 times now, that I've been thinking about. Things have been running through my head as you've been speaking from your professional perspectives about what we saw tonight. And thank you for braving the snow we're going to encounter when we leave and staying with us tonight.